ever wondered what lurked in the margins of medieval manuscripts? Have you seen the bizarre ways women were portrayed in medieval times? Did you know that beneath the religious veneer of medieval art lies a disturbing world of female monsters and sexual warnings? Number 10. The toothed Vagina. The medieval imagination conjured up one of the most terrifying images associated with female sexuality: vagina, dentata, or the toothed vagina. This wasn't just some obscure concept. It appeared in manuscripts, carvings, and storytelling throughout Europe. Imagine an actual set of teeth down there, ready to snap at unsuspecting men. Medieval clerics and artists portrayed this disturbing image as the ultimate manifestation of the dangerous female body. In texts like the Malleus Maleficarum, a notorious 15th century witch-hunting manual, authors warned that witches could make men believe their penises had disappeared or been injured, playing into fears of castration connected to this toothy imagery. These representations weren't just about misogyny, though. They reflected genuine anxieties about sexuality, reproduction, and the mysterious female body during a time when medical knowledge was limited and often mixed with superstition. In one French tale, a demon disguises himself as a beautiful woman, and when a knight tries to kiss her, he discovers her mouth is filled with terrible fangs. The message was clear. Female sexuality wasn't just dangerous. It could literally devour you. Number 9. The Self-Disemboweling Sheela Na Gig. On the walls of churches across medieval Ireland, England, and parts of continental Europe, an alarming figure watches over parishioners: the Sheela Na Gig, a grotesque female figure explicitly displaying an exaggerated vulva, often appears to be pulling open or even disemboweling herself. These carvings show emaciated women with skeletal ribs, grinning skulls for faces, and hands that dramatically expose their genitals. Imagine going to church and seeing this. Historians remain divided about their purpose. Some argue they were warnings against lust and the sins of the flesh, turning female sexuality into something monstrous and repulsive. Others suggest they might be pre-Christian fertility symbols that somehow survived into the Christian era, or protective talismans against evil and bad luck. What's particularly disturbing is their placement on sacred buildings, sometimes near entrances, sometimes on windows, sometimes in the most visible positions. The church at Kilpeck in England houses one of the most famous examples, where a grinning skeletal woman pulls open an enormous vulva right above the southern doorway where parishioners would enter. Were medieval people being reminded of sin every Sunday, or was something more complex happening with these unnerving figures? Number 8. The Woman-Headed Serpent. The medieval period reimagined Eve's tempter in the Garden of Eden, transforming the biblical serpent into a disturbing hybrid creature with a woman's head and a snake's body. This feminization of evil appears in countless illuminated manuscripts and church carvings across Europe. In the stunning Bedford Hours, a luxurious prayer book from the 15th century, the serpent tempting Eve has flowing blonde hair and a woman's face, essentially making Eve tempted by another feminine entity. This visual tradition created a disturbing doubling effect that emphasized women as both the source and the victim of sin. The woman-headed serpent spread beyond religious contexts, too. Medieval bestiaries described serpents with women's faces that could enchant and lure men to their deaths. One particularly disturbing account claimed these creatures would permit a man to kiss them, but their poisoned breath would kill him instantly. A manuscript image from the 13th century shows a knight being tempted by a beautiful woman whose lower body transforms into writhing serpent coils, a perfect visualization of the supposed deceptive danger of female sexuality. Even more unnervingly, some medieval artwork shows the serpent with Eve's exact face, creating a mirror image that suggests all women contain this dangerous, tempting quality within them. Number 7. The Lustful Widow. Medieval literature and art were obsessed with the figure of the widow, particularly the young widow who was portrayed as sexually insatiable and morally corrupt. The Quinz's Joys de Mariage, 15 Joys of Marriage, a satirical 15th century French text, depicts widows as dangerous predators who trap young men into disadvantageous marriages. These women were supposedly so consumed by sexual desire, having been awakened to physical pleasure by their first husbands, that they couldn't live without it. The widow was caught in a disturbing double bind in medieval culture, expected to remain chaste and loyal to her dead husband's memory, yet simultaneously suspected of being unable to control her desires. Artwork from the period often shows widows as seductresses, wearing provocative clothing beneath their mourning garments. One famous woodcut shows a young widow seemingly grieving at her husband's tomb while secretly making arrangements to meet a lover. What made this portrayal particularly unsettling was that widows often held unusual economic and social independence compared to other women in medieval society. Their relative freedom made them threatening to the established order, so they were reimagined as sexually deviant. The anonymous poem, How the Good Wife Taught Her Daughter, warned young women that becoming a merry widow would lead to community suspicion and potentially accusations of having poisoned their husbands. Number 6. Women riding men. One of the most bizarre recurring motifs in medieval marginalia, the decorations around manuscript text, shows women literally riding on men's backs, whipping them like horses. These woman-on-top images appeared with surprising frequency in the margins of even religious texts. In a 14th century Book of Hours, a decorated initial shows a woman straddling a crawling man, firmly gripping his hair like reins while brandishing a whip. This world-turned upside-down imagery represented the medieval fear of women gaining power over men, the ultimate disorder in a society built on male dominance. These illustrations weren't just about physical domination, but were explicitly sexualized in many cases, with the men often depicted naked or partially clothed. The margins of the Luttrell Psalter, a famous 14th century illuminated manuscript, contain several such scenes, alongside other topsy-turvy images, like animals hunting humans. Historians believe these disturbing portrayals served as warnings about what might happen if the natural order, as medieval people understood it, were inverted. The images connected to the concept of the unruly woman, or the shrew who dominated her husband, a trope that would later feature prominently in works like Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew. What's particularly interesting is that these images often appeared in wealthy women's prayer books, suggesting complex reactions to these portrayals by female viewers themselves. Number 5. The luxurious temptress. Medieval art and literature were filled with women who tempted men with luxury, wealth, and beautiful objects, a disturbing blend of materialistic and sexual temptation. In manuscripts and cautionary tales, these women were often portrayed surrounded by mirrors, combs, jewelry, and fine clothing, all of which were coded as morally dangerous. The Romance of the Rose, an enormously popular medieval French poem, personified various vices as women, including Lady Wealth and Lady Idleness, who led men astray with promises of luxury and ease. What's particularly disturbing about this trope is how it connected women's bodies with material possessions. Both were things to be desired. Both were morally corrupting. Both needed to be controlled. Manuscript illustrations frequently showed these temptresses with flowing hair, a sign of sexual availability, holding mirrors that doubled their dangerous image. The motif of the woman at her toilette, combing her hair and adorning herself, became a visual shorthand for vanity and lust. A famous carving from Strasbourg Cathedral shows a woman admiring herself in a mirror, but on the reverse side, snakes and toads devour her flesh, a graphic warning about the spiritual consequences of such behavior. These representations weren't just about criticizing women, though. They reflected genuine anxiety about increasing luxury consumption in the late medieval period and the growing mercantile economy that made more goods available to more people. Number 4. The mock-birthing beast. Perhaps one of the most disturbing images in medieval art is that of a woman giving birth to monsters, animals, or demons. This imagery played on the very real and high maternal mortality rates of the period, transforming the already dangerous process of childbirth into something even more nightmarish. Manuscript illustrations sometimes showed women's bodies as literally open and penetrable with demons, entering and exiting at will. The chromatic womb. The idea that a woman's womb could wander around her body causing illness was taken quite literally in some artistic representations, with the womb depicted as a separate creature inside the female body, with its own agenda. One particularly disturbing image in the margins of a 13th century manuscript shows a woman giving birth to rabbits, connecting female reproduction to uncontrolled animal fertility. These mock births also appeared in morality tales where sinful women would give birth to beasts, representing their moral failings. The anxiety about what exactly was growing inside a woman's body reflects the limited medical knowledge of the time, but also deeper fears about female reproductive autonomy. A particularly horrifying motif showed women giving birth to their own souls at the moment of death. But for sinful women, what emerged looked more demonic than human. Number 3. The female donor as tiny supplicant. While not obviously disturbing at first glance, there's something unsettling about how female donors were depicted in medieval art compared to their male counterparts. When wealthy people commissioned religious artwork, they often had themselves included in the scene, a practice that continues today with donor plaques and naming rights. However, while men were generally portrayed at nearly the same scale as the saints and holy figures, women were frequently depicted as tiny figures, sometimes as small as a child kneeling at the feet of the holy personages. These diminutive representations literally reduced women's presence and importance even when they were the ones paying for the artwork. In the Wilton diptych, a famous English panel painting from around 1395 to 1399, King Richard II appears nearly the same size as the saints around him, whereas female donors in comparable works might be 1/3 or 1/4 the size of the holy figures. The Tres Riches, Heures du Duc de Berry, one of the most famous medieval manuscripts, shows this pattern repeatedly. Even when the donor was an extremely powerful woman like Margaret of Bavaria or Isabella of Portugal, they were still depicted as unnaturally small. This visual diminishment reflected and reinforced the idea that women, regardless of their wealth or status, were spiritually and socially lesser beings who needed to approach divinity with greater humility than men. Number 2. The woman inside the beast. Medieval bestiaries, illustrated encyclopedias of animals, both real and imagined, contained some surprisingly disturbing hybrid women-animal creatures. The most famous is probably the siren, which, in medieval tradition, wasn't always the fish-tailed creature we know today. Many medieval manuscripts show sirens as part bird, part woman, or sometimes with both bird legs and fish tails. These monstrous combinations expressed anxiety about female sexuality and deception. But even more unsettling were images where women weren't merged with animals, but contained within them. Some manuscripts show women riding inside fish, emerging from the mouths of dragons, or being vomited out by wolves. A particularly disturbing example appears in the marginalia of several 14th century books, showing a woman inside the body of a beast with only her head and sometimes hands visible, as though she's wearing the animal as a disguise or has been partially consumed by it. The Rutland Psalter contains an image of a woman's head and torso emerging from a beast's body while playing a musical instrument, combining the themes of feminine allure and monstrous nature. These disturbing hybrids suggested that women contained hidden animal natures, or that femininity itself was a kind of monstrous disguise. The idea that a beautiful woman might be concealing something bestial became a common visual metaphor, particularly in warnings about prostitution and female sexual autonomy. Number 1. The self-flagellating female saint. Perhaps the most disturbing images of women in medieval art were those that were actually meant to be inspiring. The graphic depictions of female saints torturing themselves in acts of extreme devotion. Saint Catherine of Siena was portrayed starving herself and drinking pus from the wounds of the sick. Christina the Astonishing was shown throwing herself into ovens and hanging herself from church rafters. These weren't seen as disturbing acts at the time. They were the ultimate expressions of female piety. But to modernize, the glorification of female self-harm in medieval religious art is deeply troubling. Saint Lidwina was depicted lying on a bed of sharpened sticks, while Saint Margaret was shown being tortured and devoured by Satan in the form of a dragon. What's particularly unsettling is how these images eroticized female suffering. Saint Agatha, whose breasts were cut off in her martyrdom, is almost always shown holding her severed breasts on a plate, often with an expression of serene acceptance rather than agony. The more beautiful the saint appeared while enduring horrific torture, the more powerful the image was considered to be. Female mystics like Angela of Foligno were described and depicted drinking the water used to wash lepers' wounds, finding spiritual ecstasy in acts of extreme abjection. These representations created a disturbing template for female holiness that equated women's spiritual worth with their willingness to mutilate, starve, and torture their own bodies. A visual tradition that continues to echo in modern portrayals of female beauty and sacrifice. Have you ever wondered how these disturbing medieval images of women might still influence how we see gender today? What do the margins of ancient manuscripts reveal about the anxieties that still lurk in our own cultural imagination?